All right. So as you can see by the slide count, there are only 6 slides, and then we're going to do that exercise based on the principles that I ran across and added some to. So let's see what we got here. This is what I mentioned in the previous session, this whole notion of cross-cutting. So you've got some requirements that don't impact any lines of code at all. You've got some requirements that impact only a few components, and you've got some requirements that impact an enormous number of components. There are various kinds of crosscuts. They're universal crosscuts. So if you've got coding standards, right, it's theoretically going to impact every line of code, which could be in the millions. If you've got heterogeneous crosscuts, and all of this is terminology I made up, folks, so you're not going to find it anywhere else. That means you're doing the same thing anytime that you need this to achieve whatever it is you're trying to achieve, like logging. You're going to do the same thing at every site in your code, right? So if you log on the entry to a component, or you log on the exit to a component, or both, then you're going to have the same code. Now, the hard stuff is the homogeneous stuff. So in safety, I've got a whole lot of safety hazards. I've got a whole lot of mitigations. And those mitigations in general do not look like each other, right? And so I'm going to have to find out where in the code I need to stick the mitigation, and maybe it's multiple places, and then what am I going to do exactly at that site to mitigate that problem, which may be different at a different site for the same problem. So this homogeneous stuff is really, really hard and critically important. You get it wrong, you're not mitigating what you need to mitigate, and bad things are going to happen if something goes awry at that site. So what am I saying? I'm saying that, let's say we had a development process that looked suspiciously like Agile, right? And so we're going to write our first component to do whatever the functionality in this iteration is about. Well, that's great. That's on the left side of this. But we've also, if we have figured out the things that matter, the cross-cutting things, that matter, then there's a bunch of other stuff that have to go in that same component that have nothing to do with its kind of inherent reason to exist. It's existing to support or provide a certain functionality. Yeah, that's good. We need that. We also need these other things to go. So you could actually imagine writing a whole set of components with with only modest understanding of the functionality that they support, because that would give you a clue as to which of the quality attributes were important, what the hazards relative to those quality attributes are, what the mitigations relative to those quality attributes are, where they should go. And so you can write a whole lot of code over here that has absolutely nothing to do with the basic functionality. Anybody, does that make sense to anyone? Do you actually find that there's code in the component that has absolutely nothing to do with the basic functionality that the component is doing?
It's a common complaint of our developers, like over half their code is just exception try-catch blocks.
Right.
So.
Right. It's handling stuff. Handling stuff. Yeah, over half. That's a common complaint. That has been a common complaint forever.
But they have no policies around it, because it's like they have try-catch blocks around a function that is entirely inside a try-catch block. So it's like completely no-throw, and they just put a try-catch block around anything.
I see.
When in doubt, try-catch.
Yeah, it's good if you understand what you're doing, rather than just mindlessly following rules. which may not have.
Well, they don't have rules either. It's just,
Excuse me?
they don't have rules either. It's just kind of
Oh, I see. No rules.
tribal knowledge.
You're not doing safety critical stuff, are you?
We used to work for Boeing.
Oh.
No, just kidding.
I've heard of that.
I've heard of them. Yes, okay. We shall not go there. So the point is that I'd like you to kind of get this diagram in your head and say to yourself and to others you work with, this is the norm. This is what we should expect. Because we got these cross-cutting guys that show up in a lot of different places that have nothing to do inherently with the basic functionality being provided by the component, but they just need to be there because we got all these other requirements that we don't think about very much. As I said, developers think about functionality and testing. Those are the two terms that inhabit their mind. And you got to say, open up here, folks. There are other really important issues. It doesn't make any difference if the self-driving car works perfectly and kills, some number of people, but apparently Tesla doesn't care. No, I'm not being fair there, but anyway. But they've killed more than any of their other competitors. Apparently it doesn't matter. Anyway, so to minimize quality debt, I mean, you've all heard of technical debt, right? So we get technical debt, we do stuff, we don't do stuff. Well, some of that technical debt is quality debt, right? That we either we are missing things that should be there. That makes us much quicker, of course. If we just ignore the right side of the figure and only create modules to do the left side of the figure, we very quickly get software that, quote, does what the customer wants. Okay? Now, the customer didn't say, oh, by the way, you shouldn't kill me, or you shouldn't drain my bank account, or you shouldn't allow, thieves in there to take my credit card information. That's generally not where their mind is, right? And that's perfectly appropriate. But it needs to be, if you remember, the different types of requirements and who's responsible, the developers are responsible for that stuff. And communicating to our friends, the customers, by saying, yeah, we're going to supply everything you want and a bunch of stuff you need, but you may not be aware of the need until bad things happen. Cross-cutting requirements should be identified early. Remember I talked bathwater, big requirements up front, bad idea, throw it out. But quality requirements up front is important. We're going to talk about it right now. So you must select and analyze and specify the goals, particularly for these cross-cutting guys. And then you need to develop, let's see, let me get you here. QRUF, quality requirements up front. I have not been able to figure out any way to not do this and still do a sensible job of software engineering, basically. Because if you fail to identify at least most of the quality requirements, quality attribute requirements that are relevant to your project, and identify the hazards relative to those things, and the mitigations relative to those things, and put that code into the very first module that ever gets written, then, since there's no magic in the world that I've ever seen, right, you'll have this module, which will have a whole lot of functional stuff and a woefully inadequate set of quality supports. And that'll be true for the second module and the third module and the fourth module, and I don't know at what point in time, somebody blows the whistle and says, excuse me, folks, let's think about quality attributes now. And they're going to, as far as I can understand, arise organically, magically, At some point, somebody's going to raise their hand and say, I think we should think about this. I think we should think about reliability or performance or something. Oh, good idea. Let's see. And then somewhere in mid-project, you think about that stuff, you realize that the mitigation impacts, half the modules you've already written, and you got to go back and add stuff and verify stuff. And while I do believe in incremental development, I do not believe in incremental quality. I just don't see how that process can ever make sense. Because we all know at some point somebody's going to go, I don't have the time or the budget to go back. We're just going to do without it. And you're going to ship it with all extremities crossed that certain bad things don't happen, at least while you're employed there, right? And nobody's... I said these things in a conference. I wrote a paper called Agile considered dangerous to quality. And I presented some of these ideas. And the Agile folks came up afterwards and hit me with, you don't understand. I don't know how many times I've heard that phrase, and I'm certainly willing to believe I don't understand, but they didn't tell me what I didn't understand. They just said, you don't understand, and they turned around and left. So to this day, I'm ignorant of my ignorance, and I'm waiting for the first one to tell me how this is wrong. Okay? Now, the good news is you can add what I call quality awareness to Agile, so that in iteration 0 or -1 or however, before you actually do the first component, if you do this identification and then have it on your list of every increment that's coming down the line is going to know these things and put the right code in, hey, you got quality, what I call quality aware Agile. So it's not like all is lost, but I haven't seen anybody talk about this. So I already told you about this line. Now that's, my bias is I cannot see an alternative to that. It either won't show up or it'll cost you 3 arms and 4 legs to retrofit what you need in there. Okay? So quality first, in this sense, right, is much more than a slogan. It's like, explain to me how you can put it somewhere else in a cost-effective manner, and I'm perfectly happy to understand that, but nobody's been able to do that, hopefully not because I'm closed-minded, but because they haven't figured out either how to do it. Okay, look at that. 20 minutes. Let's see, actually, I think 25 minutes. Let's take a moment or two. Any questions about this? This is super important stuff, folks. That whole quality attribute stuff, the people haven't figured it out in the main yet. And it's big and it's ugly, and there's lots to know. But if you don't cause at least some of it, again, I'm not asking for the whole 9 yards at the beginning, just a few things identified and put in those early modules that historically in your organization would have arisen at some point, unspecified point in the future, I think that's a big win for you. Okay. Questions about this? So once you look at the models that are no longer simplistic but are complex, you see things that the simple models simply don't tell you anything about or help you with or whatever. Okay? You're out there in the middle of the desert with the charge survive. Thanks. You're not helping me at all. Okay. So, groups around the first exercise, which is to discuss in your teams these principles, and then we'll do a little debrief, I guess at 2:50, and see what kind of thoughts you've come up with relative to these principles. Know what you chatted about. Anybody want to share an observation? Yes, sir.
My only critique was that there's no ontology for the invented terms.
Which term are we talking about?
Complexifying.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay.
That received a big X.
Definition
going
of
up.
big X, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Oh, thus proving on you.
Maybe it's on page 125 of the.
Everyone. No, actually, it's not.
You don't have an ontology in your light RM?
I say that there's a need for an ontology, but light RM is supposed to work across any application in any domain.
Shouldn't you have a quality attribute-centric ontology that helps
Well,
define
there are 2 or 3 lead-in topics that give assumptions and discuss that a little bit. I wouldn't say it deserves the title ontology, but I have some description, if you check it out. Now, by the way, the model that exists that you can download, the 125 pages, is a PDF, which is wonderful if you're not going to change anything. If you actually consider using it, then you will need to purchase whiz folders from Sanjay, which will set you back a modest sum, I don't know, $30 or something. And then I will be very happy. You send me an email saying I'm ready to use it, and I will send you the whiz folders file, which you can then edit your little heart out, make multiple copies of, and do all kinds of things. But since I was fairly pessimistic that anybody was actually ever going to use this thing, I figured, well, I'll put it up there as a PDF that's indexed on the left-hand side, and that'll at least get them to understand. And if you want to create this little mini model, you don't have to buy whiz folders. You just have to do it in any old outliner or Word or whatever you want. Other observations? Other bugs? Other things you don't believe? I mean, what I did is I found this very nice paper by these 2 smart guys that had worked on this project and said, there's some principles here that I think we should, enumerate, and they laid them out, and only some of them applied to the requirements piece, so I got that, and I had about half the set there, and then I added some more along the way. So hopefully it was useful to you. That's what I'm hoping, is the principles are useful. I'm going to modify the schedule a little bit, because the last 2 pieces are both 30 minutes apiece. So I'm just going to squeeze out the 5 minutes of this is what happens when you get old. See, words are out there, you just can't access them. The breaks. I'm going to squeeze out the 5-minute breaks. Yeah, well, you're much too young, sweetheart. Okay. In January, I will be 80, which is an enormous number. One thing I can tell you about approaching 80, I had no idea I would ever be in this situation, I have friends who aren't, and having all this fun also was just something I feel incredibly lucky about. Okay, so the final section is talking about a couple of things I thought were important. Number one is you say, okay, Dave, you're telling us that we have to come up with some kind of requirements development strategy. And I'm saying, yes, that's what I'm saying. But unfortunately, the strategy you come up with is going to have to be a mixed strategy, I believe. So if we look at a whole bunch of possible applications, and we look at a whole bunch of forms that requirements might take, there's not a single form which you should use all the time on a particular application. Different kinds of things. Well, I've already showed you that, in my view, if you're doing quality attribute requirements, you should be embedding them inside the LightRM model, right? That's over here. That's your quality requirements. Now over here, you've got your functional requirements. Now maybe some of you are going to use ears, which is a nice little kind of template for certain kinds of requirements. Other requirements require equations. There are a variety of different forms that are appropriate for the subject of the requirement. So in different situations, you're going to do different things. When the development staff has a deep knowledge of the application, there will be few or no requirements at all. Okay? When you have modest understanding, then there are going to be some specs. And they have to be, tailored to the situation. And then when you're doing safety critical stuff at the other end of the spectrum, right, you got a lot of specs. Even if you've been doing it for a while, you got a lot of specs. On the same project, you got different situations. So let me go to the next one. Let's imagine what Microsoft's strategy would be when they did Windows 10, right? So they're going to have some unmodified, reused components. And the strategy that I use for requirements for those guys is going to be pretty minimal, right? Then they're going to have some enhanced reused requirements. So it's going to do the stuff it did before and these three other things. So what are my requirements going to look like, right? They're going to focus presumably on the three other things. That's assuming, of course, that my level of confidence in these guys is high and justified. Okay? I'm just going to focus on the changes. Now, maybe I've got one or two components out there that are working fine, but they're ugly. And so I'm going to take advantage of this project to refactor them. What is that requirement going to look like? Well, if I've got requirements around somewhere, I don't want functionality appearing or disappearing from these components. So if I've got really nice requirements for the component that needs to be refactored, that's great. If I don't, I have to pay the price and write decent requirements so that whoever's doing the refactoring will do the right thing. Then I've got new components, some of which will be clearly understood. And so I don't need to say a lot more about them. And I got other components which are a big cloud. I don't exactly know what we want them to do, how we want them to do it, whatever. And there I'm going to have a lot of things written down to make sure that my team, whoever's doing those kind of things, are synchronized in their understanding, and hopefully they're even correct, right, or accurate, because they might be synchronized on the wrong thing. So I'll get something that doesn't actually work, and then I'll have to do the necessary modification to make it happen. So when you have big software that has all these little chunks that are in different states, I'll call it, from pure reuse to pure I don't know exactly what I'm doing, you wouldn't use the same approach the requirements on all of those different situations. So somewhere at the beginning of the project, somebody's got to say, okay, here's the architecture, here's how we're going to divide all these things up. Let's use this approach on these type of requirements, this approach on this type of requirements. And when I say that's not a burning bush kind of commandment. That's the approach we're going to take if you think we should modify that for this component for whatever reason, please do it, right? Do the sensible thing. So there's no silver bullet. Big surprise, right? Brooks told us that long ago. We keep wanting to jump from one silver bullet to the next silver bullet, although we've been told there are no silver bullets. So I don't know. That must be the definition of insanity, along with the other one. So the solution is really not in the textbook, nor is a simplistic development model for the reason I just showed you, right? So we have this notion of phased software requirements development. This is waterfall. Oh, really? Everything up front? Yes. No, now we're in the modern age. We got iterative software requirements development. Yes, that works good. Or we have mixed software requirements development so that we do the appropriate thing. What did I say here? Mixed requirements development does what's needed when and where it's needed. How simple is that? Well, simple to say, hard to do, right? A lot of work involved in deciding how many different kinds of components you have relative to their requirements, needs, and then how are you going to meet the needs for each one of those things. Nobody said this was easy. Okay, so there are still a bunch of things that are true about requirements development in the world. At least I believe they're true. Most stakeholders have a singular focus on functionality and testing. And that's not only true of developers, it's true of customers in general. You know, this is what I wanted to do. It's a natural thing. We build software to do stuff. It's not an art object, although there have been contests for, you know, beautiful C listings. But in general, we're writing software to take some action at appropriate times that people want to be done. So functionality is an absolutely natural first thing to think about. It just needs to not be the last thing that you think about. So we've got this. And this is the heart of one of the standards for autonomous vehicles. Okay? A little bit out of date in my view. I wrote a paper about what's wrong with this. I got up at an automobile conference and gave the paper, not realizing the author of the standard was in the room, along with his lieutenant. So they both sprang up at the question session. They didn't have a question, they just said I was completely wrong. Well, that's all right. I figured out that the best thing to say was nothing. And so that's what I said in response. But anyway, we can have a disagreement. Now, most stakeholders do not understand the collection of quality attributes. They understand that there's a thing called security, and that's important. They understand safety, that's important. Reliability is important. Performance is, performance is an attribute. There are many different kinds. So responsiveness and throughput and blah, blah, blah. All of these things are important. And people make careers, right, out of being safety experts in organizations. They know a ton. There is a ton, unfortunately, to know, and more every day, as those folks with far too much time on their hands invent new ways to make your software unsafe. And so the people who are making that a career have to learn those new ways and how to counteract them, and it's a kind of, I think it's a never-ending game, I'm not sure. So they don't understand the collection of qualities and the relationships to each other that, first of all, qualities and functionality have virtually nothing in common with each other. Okay? That's part of the problem I could be an expert in functionality, know how to do functional requirements until forever, and it doesn't help me at all do the quality stuff. And there's not a lot of sources to go to find out how to do the quality stuff, folks. That's the other bad news, is that all those models I showed you previously are really simplistic and don't help at all getting insight into the things you need to understand. Understanding one quality helps not at all in understanding another one. Okay? So if you really got safety down, it doesn't help you at all in security, it doesn't help you in performance. Each one of those things is a little silo where you need, specific, attribute-specific understanding of those things. And bad news, one quality can either support or actually conflict with a different one. At which point, if you say, I want usability and I want security, you go, well, how about if I give you usability after you get through the security wall? Oh, okay, I'll live with that. But that's a conscious choice. I mean, you made that, you've understood that there's a conflict, and you've made a decision, sometimes to lower the level of something that you want in order to get something else that you want. As I said, the LightRM model has over 30 common characteristics because it was consciously built to help you do everything you need to once you decide that a particular quality is relevant. We just say, that's good, and I go figure out how to make any of that happen. It was built specifically to help with that job. Not only figure out what they are, but quality verification beyond testing. Okay. Most stakeholders do not understand that a useful quality model is essentially for cost-effective that. Okay, so I think I've probably overstated that. Few developers have taken a course in requirements development. Sigh, no course in requirements development at the U of M. Now that doesn't mean that you haven't heard the word, because it shows up in the title of some of the courses. But apparently it's not important enough, my tongue is in my cheek, to warrant a course itself. Now I did a little research where LinkedIn had a list of the 25, quote, top software engineering programs in the US. And the way they got that list was they went and asked the people at Google and other places, where did you go to school? And that's where they came up with the list. Anyway, it wasn't really important. I went on the website for each of these schools to see what the requirements course was. Okay, 25 schools, 4 courses. Okay, so I guess you're getting as good a requirements intro here as anywhere else, unless you're one of the 4, in which case you get a full course in requirements. That's Carnegie Mellon was one. I don't remember the other 3. I've got it somewhere, but I'm not sure, actually. Now, of course, it could have been my poor web searching skills, so they might have had one hidden away that didn't come up. But this is just an indicator of what I'm not absolutely certain. But I do know that most developers don't understand requirements development per se, and certainly don't understand quality attribute requirements. Okay. And most of the courses that I've seen in requirements development are based upon these simplistic models. Sigh. Challenge number 5, very few stakeholders are concerned about the dangers of the current approach to AVs. I proposed a discussion at a requirements conference 2 years ago in Amsterdam to discuss this issue. At first, no one understood what in the world I was talking about. After they did, they asked me how many people I would guarantee would show up. I said 1. Me. Outside of that, I have no idea. But they were very kind, and actually some of the people on the program committee showed up so that there would be more than one. And ironically, a manager from Intel dropped me an email and said, reserve a spot. I thought to myself, I don't think this will be a problem. Plenty of room. But to this day, I don't understand why we hear nothing of this topic. I mean, what does that say about the state of software engineering? Everybody must be assuming that all these smart people in all of these teams have a good grasp of requirements, because it can't be intellectual property, as I mentioned before. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And then where's my glossary? What does safe following mean?
Are there any industries or areas that have a common?
I think avionics. Now, I'm not a guy from avionics. I don't know, but if you want to look at an industry that is safety critical and has a lot of really smart people doing a lot of smart checking, I got to believe. First of all, they've been at it so much longer, right? It's when you automate something that had previously never been automated before that the greatest risk of terminology, actually I can't think of an area more dangerous, because everybody drives. So everybody's going to think that they understand everything they need to understand. Well, that's a dangerous situation right there. So if I'm doing risk management, it would seem like an AV glossary put out by whomever, see, would be a start. Nope, nobody's even, I mean, people are talking about, quote, working together, and they're defining what safety cases are going to mean in this area. But glossaries and requirement specifications, not a peep, at least not a peep that I've ever run across. And believe me, I spend some time looking. So what I'm saying is that if we feel that it's important to define what we want the software to do before we design it, and we understand that there's an enormous amount of developer and stakeholder ignorance around requirements, you should be concerned, as I am, I guess, for your loved ones who are not going to get a choice. These things might implode. Nancy Levison said to me, I don't know whether she believes it or not, believes that self-driving is never going to happen, that the problem's too great, they're going to kill too many people along the way, and the public will never accept it. Maybe she's right. I don't know. But if she's not, I know there are trillions of dollars being poured into this technology. If it becomes operational on a wide basis, your loved ones will not have a choice. You don't have to own. You just have to have your loved ones walking on the sidewalk.
When a car
But
decides to do
don't
something.
the self-driving cars just have to kill less people than humans do? I mean, I
No,
don't have a
which they
choice
already
walking
do.
on the sidewalk right now. If somebody's
No, I agree.
texting, I get run over right
I
now.
agree.
The current rate, I think, of death by driver is about 350,000 a year, is how many people we're killing. Now, when people talk about, well, what should our acceptable level be, right? Well, it ain't going to be zero, because stuff happens, right? The boulder falls off the whatever and smunches the car, and there's nothing the self-driving or any other car is going to do about it. But how about 10%? So on an upcoming slide here, funny you should ask. So the carnage on the road, so there's about 350,000 fatalities. So if we take 10% of that, then you get these numbers here, right? So this is just kind of fun, right? Now, nobody in the industry is proposing anything. None of the regulators are proposing anything. So everybody is waiting for the other one to propose something. I don't know, it seems to me 10% is 10% of the carnage that we're currently doing is a reasonable goal, which means that some people will die along the way, and some people are going to die along the way to figuring out how we get to this, right? I mean, this is not Orville and Wilbur, trying to do this thing where only the two were at risk. This is about as massive a safety threat as I can imagine. And so, to the extent that some companies are relying on the road testing, strange things are going to happen. Kangaroos are going to happen, but more importantly, other things are going to happen. Ladies wheeling bicycles across the road in Arizona are going to happen, even though there's a safety driver not paying attention.
I don't have that pessimistic of a view.
Okay.
So I think just like with the commercial airlines, a lot of people were probably pretty concerned when they first started proposing putting 100 people in the
Oh yes, oh yes, that's right.
People did die.
Right.
They figured out how to pressurize the plane.
Yes, yes, and those same, yeah.
People are going to die along the way, but people die every day.
Right.
You just have
So
to
the
minimize
question
it.
is,
10x
are
might be a
they
good
dying
target.
unnecessarily?
Or not. That's the distinction I make. One is, do we know how to do good systems engineering and catch a bunch? And the other stuff is going to be just stuff that we couldn't imagine. I'm fine with that. But I think right now, since I don't believe that good requirements are being done, that means the designs are going to suffer, the verification is going to suffer, and eventually the product is going to be on the road, not because we couldn't imagine, but because we just didn't do good, high-quality, safety-critical systems engineering, okay?
Help the designs in collaboration and it borders more on negligence than accident.
Right, right.
I can see it working. I mean, I'm not pessimistic either, but if you want to bring those numbers down, you would want to remove other vehicles from the road that are not autonomous to get, it's basically.
Oh, I love this. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's going to be a federal law that it's illegal to own, or not to own, but
On
to
the
drive.
same roadway,
Right,
multimodal.
so we're going to have the autonomous vehicle roadway
Public road.
completely cleared of human beings at the wheel, and the other road.
But that's exactly what the automotive industry did when they were first bringing out cars. They made it more illegal for people to be on the roads. They had to stay on the sidewalks.
Right.
That's why they invented jaywalking
Right.
as a crime.
And how do you
And
think
so
this strategy is going to work?
it's going to work the same way. They're going to do the same thing.
Oh, it is.
They'll start
I'm
building
wondering
lanes.
what representatives in a democratic society are going to go, oh yeah, we could just,
No,
these roadways are going to outlaw human drivers.
No, they'll use the strangler pattern for it, and just all new roadways are going to have infrastructure to support self-driving, and the legacy roads will degrade.
Listen, anything that kills less people, I'm for. But
Some of those things are going to happen. Okay, so this notion of what safety should be, what level of safety should be required, is very much an open question, completely unresolved. Nobody wants to touch it. It's the third rail. Now we've got our friends in AI. Yeah, neural networks are a beautiful thing until they're not. From a verification perspective, they are not. No one knows where the boundaries of the network are. So this particular image will be recognized as a camel, and it is a camel. Now, if I slightly perturb that image, it will still be recognized as a camel. If I perturb it a little bit more, it will now be seen as a goat. And no one knows where those demarcation lines are, which makes verification pretty hard. So if my self-driving car, to come back to a well-worn topic, is recognizing a child, what kind of perturbations do I need until the child becomes a goat? I don't know. A non-child?
Well, they're less
They have a
concerned
higher
if they get
version
into a
of
tight
child.
situation and we got goat and human. The goat's gonna go. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, because they're gonna have a
Those
cost
multiple
function.
children that-
Yeah.
So it's not just
I'm sorry. Yes. Anyway, so what I'm saying here is defining quality attributes, or really defining requirements for AI components based on deep neural nets, again, is nobody's touched this so far. Everybody I've ever talked to who knows tons more about this than I do said, no, we don't know where the boundaries are. I said, isn't that a little bit of a problem? How much redundancy do I need? How many of these neural nets do I need? 3, maybe, and then we're going to vote on child, goat, you know? How much is all that going to cost? I don't know.
Kids die every year for my Apple products, and I still buy those, so, you know, it's terrible, but it's true.
Okay.
No, I agree. As I said, it's an open issue. I'm trying to identify the things that are still unsolved in the requirements area. So what should accuracy requirements for an AI-based component look like? I don't think anybody knows the answer to that at the moment. Okay, so 5 minutes more. Do the last exercise, which isn't sharing. It's just, I'm hoping to have you think about any of the things that you heard this afternoon that might actually help you, help your work situation, or whatever. And any improvement suggestions that you have for me, aside from doing a glossary for the principles to improve this experience.